For months, mass protests have swept across the US, with demonstrators demanding an end to their government's support for Israel amid its massacre of the Palestinians in Gaza, which many say amount to genocide. And yet, the Democratic Party, often seen to be the progressive ones, remain staunchly supportive of Israel, despite evidence of war crimes and atrocities.
And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself.
So why is this the case? Well, the truth is very uncomfortable, and today we're diving deep into it. So there are two main explanations as to why the Democratic Party refuses to side with the Palestinians, and both of them are interlinked. Let's start with the first reason: political self-interest. This is what is also known as electoral realism, a theory that politicians make decisions primarily to win elections and not necessarily because it is the moral or right thing to do. So according to this theory or explanation, Democrats know that taking a strong pro-Palestinian stance is very risky. This is because, whilst there is growing support for Palestinians, particularly among younger voters, the reality is that the numbers simply aren't big enough to force a policy change. The turnout for younger voters in elections has been traditionally quite low, with only 53% of 18 to 29-year-olds voting in the 2020 election, which was much lower than the 66% turnout across all age groups. This means that overall, voters aged 18 to 29 made up only about 16% of all voters in 2020. And this is actually a consistent theme, as the highest percentage that they've made up in the past few decades was only 18% in 1992. Meanwhile, in contrast, older voters turn out in higher numbers and tend to be more sympathetic to Israel. Whilst it's true that 16% can make a huge difference in elections, especially in key swing states like Michigan, the reality is that many of these voters won't be voting with Gaza as their main priority. Young people, like most voters, seem to be more concerned about things like healthcare, the economy, and jobs. And again, there is evidence to back this up. According to a Harvard youth poll, only 34% rated Israel-Palestine as the most important issue, which overall ranked it second to last in issues that young people consider most important to them. So whilst other polls show that, for example, almost 2/3 of Democrats oppose sending further military aid to Israel, they're simply not willing to die on this hill in the elections. Overall, whether it is right or wrong, voters simply won't consider US support for Israel's genocide in Gaza as a deal breaker. And this unfortunately has been reflected in recent elections. A study by Brookings concluded that there are low rates of electoral success for anti-Israel candidates. Whilst they acknowledge that there is a divide amongst Democrats over Israel's mass killing of Palestinians, anti-Israel candidates, in their words, compose only 2% of the primary winners. And a key example that they cite is Jamal Bowman's recent defeat, who is one of the few Democrats who strongly advocated for the Palestinians. But let's be clear, this is not just about voters. Lobbying organisations like AIPAC wield significant influence, funding campaigns and pressuring politicians to maintain a pro-Israel stance. On top of this, there is a strong pro-Israel narrative in the US media, meaning outspoken criticism of Israel will likely receive negative coverage. Ultimately, for Democrats, the message is clear: supporting Israel is politically safer even if it is morally wrong. But there is more to this story than just politics. The second reason for Democratic support lies in deep-rooted ideological biases, something we can understand through Orientalism, a concept introduced by the scholar Edward Said. Orientalism is a framework which highlights how the West has historically viewed the Middle East as the other, a place of violence, backwardness, and difference. And this mindset has seeped into how Western societies, including the US, perceive the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel is often seen as part of the Western world, a bastion of democracy and civilization in a hostile region. And on the other hand, the Palestinians are frequently dehumanized, portrayed as violent or associated with terrorism. And this isn't just a media spin, it's an ingrained bias. But let's be clear, the media plays a huge role in this as well. Palestinian voices are often marginalized and their suffering minimized. In contrast, we constantly see Israel's perspective, reinforcing the idea that they are like us, whilst Palestinians are the other.
We are refugees in our own country. I don't know when I'm going to go back.
You should look at these people. Okay. Do you denounce terrorism like that? Do you denounce Hamas?
I'm not going to engage with
Simone, it's a simple question.
Of course, they're terrorists. They're massacring innocent people. They would wipe every Jew off the globe if they could.
And this bias makes it easier for Democrats and many Americans to sympathize with Israel, even when it's clear that Palestinians are the ones suffering the most. So it's not just about politics or electoral tactics, it's also about who is seen as more human in the eyes of the public. So there you have it, the Democrats' support for Israel isn't just about strategy, it's also shaped by a biased worldview that's rooted in colonial views. So if you think Democrats are the ones following the moral high ground, think again. Their policies on Israel and Palestine are ultimately driven by cold, hard political self-interest and deep-seated ideological biases. Those of us who are horrified by the scenes in Gaza and the unwavering US support for Israel will probably be asking the same question. What the hell do we do now? How can we do anything to stop this? In my personal opinion, I think it will be difficult to see change come from within the US. I think politicians and a large part of the public remain unable or unwilling to do justice for the Palestinians. Instead, I think change will come externally. In other words, when the pressure from the rest of the world becomes so heavy that it is actually in the US and Israel's interest to stop their genocidal campaign. What this pressure looks like or when it will occur remains to be seen. But in the meantime, this doesn't mean that change within the US is impossible. It starts with awareness. We need to challenge these harmful biases, amplify Palestinian voices, and continue to demand that our leaders do better. So if you're in the US or any Western country, I encourage you to critically evaluate the narratives you're exposed to and seek out Palestinian perspectives and really empathize with them on a human level. At this moment of time, it's the best we can do. If you found this video insightful, please share and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For now, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.